So hello everyone, welcome to the reading group. In this week, I'm going to be presenting a new paradigm for FPGA placement without explicit packing by Wuxi Li and David Z. Pan. They're from the University of Texas in Austin, or at least David Pan's currently working there. This paper was from 2018, and I'm going to be completely honest. The reason I wanted to read this paper was their figures. They have some really beautiful figures in this text, and these figures act as advertisements for papers. So I strongly recommend you put time into the color, into the size and shape of everything you make, because that's what gets people to read the paper. So this figure is probably the best figure I've seen to explain kind of where we are in VPR and what we're doing with analytical placement. And they did it in a really good job to explain where they're coming from. So how do I read this? Well, what we see here is that as we go from left to right, the placement is going to become more legal. And as we go from bottom to top, the packing is going to become more legal. And the idea is that you start off with, let's say, in a completely random placement, nothing's legal, nothing's in the right place. And you're going to move over to the top right where you get a placed and packed legal solution. Now, VPR is this red line currently. We first pack, then we place, and that's kind of it. We do a pack, place, legalize. However, and I wouldn't exactly call this pack, place, legalize. Me personally, I would call this pack, legalize, and then place. But in VPR, our placements are always legal, so it's kind of just wording. This blue line is more closer to what we're doing in VPR right now for analytical placement. We're going to do a flat placement. We're going to keep things, we're not going to cluster things yet. We're not going to pack anything yet. Then we're going to legalize given the information we just got, and then we're going to place and legalize it again. The idea about this flat placement, packing, and then replacement is to kind of get more spatial information. If you just pack immediately, you're kind of losing all the spatial information you'd want to get from the problem. These authors actually take it one step further. What they say is, why even do this legalization step where we have to pause our placement and legalize? Is it possible for us to, while we're legalizing, also do the placement? The idea being that as I'm doing my placement, that will inform my packing. And as I'm doing my packing, that will inform my placement. So together, they will create a better solution. And that's what they're calling their new paradigm. The new paradigm is this green arrow that just says, we're not going straight up, we're going diagonal right here. Is that clear? Because that's kind of the key fundamental thing from this paper is we are not going to just pause the placement and pack. We're going to do pack and place together. Cool. So there's some challenges with this. There's a reason why we don't do that. We don't do packing and placement at the same time. The clear problem is that, let me move this out of the way. That's kind of annoying. I'll just do this. Perfect. So the reason why we don't do that is because the complexity gets really gnarly. If you just do packing and no placement, it's kind of nice. You can create your clusters, and all you have to do is just make sure you don't make too many clusters. If you're doing your placement, assuming things are already packed, you just got to make sure you put things in the right place. When you're doing them together, it makes the problem larger and larger and more complex. So because of that, you have to make a trade-off here. Either your runtime is very long or your quality is very degraded. You have a large displacement or you just get no solution. The solution the authors propose to this is actually very straightforward and is actually right. The flat placement just needs to be as close to legal as possible. If your flat placement is basically almost there, your full legalization doesn't have to do as much work, it doesn't get as stuck. And that's something that they say is a key aspect of their work. They make it so their flat placement is as close to legal as they can make it. They actually spend most of their time getting the flat placement to be legal before they even they spend most of their, I just got to pin this and then there we go. They spend most of their time making sure the flat placement is legal before they even do their full legalization. And that's kind of a key point. There's also another problem with these flows. These flows are also very sensitive to the interaction between block types because as I'm moving things and placing things, there's some legality constraints that you just can't account for when you're doing your flat placement. For example, LUTs and flip-flops. Whether two flip-flops can go within the same cluster is dependent on which clocks do the flip-flops use, because there might be clock constraints. It's dependent on what the enable signals are. And also the LUTs that are in there as well. If the LUT and flip-flop share an input, I can actually put more things inside of that cluster. If they don't share the input and they're completely independent, that can actually change my legality constraints. So this is another reason why these flows are really, it's really challenging to make a place legalized flow. And so because these legality constraints are hard to predict, it's necessary that you leave a little bit of extra space in your flat placement. So you're not going to make a flat placement that's just barely on the cusp of legality. What you're going to do is you're going to leave a little bit of extra space. There's some extra LUTs available, just in case I need to move things around in some last minute touch-ups. However, this wastes resources, and the authors do acknowledge that, and they kind of, this is something that you have to kind of trade off as a hyperparameter or an empirical thing that you add to your models. And so they kind of use this figure to kind of explain this problem. I'm going to walk over to there. So the idea being here is that we have what is our area capacity and our CLB capacity. This is the actual area that this is my prediction for how much this is going to take up. And this is how much we can actually put in there. And what they argue for is that we can't get too close to the area capacity. We need to kind of have a little bit of a buffer zone. There's almost like exclusion zone where we do not try to overfill towards. By keeping this lower, they argue that you can actually prevent it from overfilling too quickly. Just to kind of summarize, place legalized flows are hard. We get around it by just making sure that our flat placement is as good as possible and as safe as possible so that our detailed placer doesn't work as hard. Is that clear? Cool. This is their flow. 3 steps, easy. Let's just go home. It's not. They spend 4 pages on dynamic LUT FF area adjustment and 5 pages on parallel direct legalization. They spend 0 pages on the quadratic. Actually, no, they spend half a page on quadratic and nothing on rough legalization and literally nothing on detailed placement. This is the only time they mention it, I think. And done, I hope they mention that. So this is their flow. Now, you're going to notice this is saying, okay, what is this doing? We are going to take our design and we're going to perform a quadratic analytical placement on it. How that works is as follows. I get my netlist and I imagine it as a bunch of all my cells all connected together with springs. These spring forces and then of course there are fixed cells that must be placed in certain locations. And if you imagine I just release, all the cells are going to boing, move to a point where they minimize their wire length. Hey, I gotta use some notation here. That's the proper term. Boing. But there are ways that you can make this a little bit more accurate by changing the weight of these nets, of these spring connections. And by changing that, you can actually change how close to how you estimate the wire length. Now, they don't go into detail as to what their rough legalizer is, and I don't think it actually is that important which rough legalizer you use. The key idea is this. In an area of the chip, there's only so many things that can go inside of it. They call that area. So there's a certain capacity of that area, and the cells, they have themselves their own areas. And the idea is that if I put too many cells in one place, there will be too many cells, the sum of all their areas will be too much, and that will be illegal. So you have to spread the cells out so that the sum of the areas of all the cells in a region is no larger than the capacity. That's just the basic fundamentals of rough legalization. This new bottom box is what they add that makes this different, to make it more accurate. Remember, our goal is to make a flat placement that is as close to legal as possible. In order to do that, we have to adjust the areas. And why are we doing this is because there are some extra legality constraints that the quadratic placement just can't formulate properly. The rough legalizer, just counting the area is not enough. There are some other key facts we're going to learn about these things. For example, maybe this LUT, maybe a bunch of LUTs are all fighting for the same region. So what I'm going to do is just expand the areas of all those LUTs to kind of push them apart a little bit. And that's kind of the theme here. We're going to continue doing this. Solve the quadratic, rough legalize, update the areas. Solve the quadratic, rough legalize, update the areas. You do this repeatedly until you get convergence, which just means things just stop moving. Or in other words, in reality, it's just we stopped adjusting the areas, so everything is just resolving. Now, there was some wording they use, which I think is important to talk about. I don't think they do a full solving loop. Now, when it comes to solving a quadratic program, you do that using iterative solvers, which iteratively get the answer better and better and better. I believe that what they do is they do their area adjustments every so often. It's not at the end of every single quadratic loop, but they do it during the quadratic loops, which is just kind of a technique. It's a technique that a lot of people do. That's weird. It's just a technique that people do because you don't actually have to let it converge. It's nice to actually, it just kind of moves towards a better and better solution, so it just works. Okay, we spent all that time making a super legal flat initial placement. What was all that for? It's for the parallel direct legalization approach. This is an approach that they show, which they show very high scalability with number of threads, which is a really nice thing to have. And they also show that it's linear with the number of cells. Two properties that we were always looking for in a detailed placer, or a full legalizer. And we'll talk about this algorithm. The idea is that this algorithm doesn't just create clusters. It doesn't just place clusters, it does them both at the same time. So that's important. And then finally, we do detailed placement and we're done. So let's talk about the dynamic area adjustment. It's actually kind of an important topic. And how am I doing on time? Oh yeah, we're great. So dynamic area adjustment, the idea is that packing and utilization is local scoped in nature. What does that mean? Well, whether a LUT can pack where it is, if this LUT is in a legal location, does not depend on some LUT over there across the room. It only depends on the LUTs and flip-flops in its general neighborhood. Not only that, the authors also claim that the area of each cell, basically how the packing legality and utilization, can be largely determined based on its spatial neighbors that are the same type, which I didn't write in the slides, but that's what they say. So the idea is that I don't need to look at every single cell in the entire circuit. All I have to say is for this LUT, look at its nearest, not the nearest, but look for within a window of L by L, find all the LUTs, and that's what we're going to use for our area estimation. And so here's the basic process. We perform quadratic placement and partial rough legalization based on the connectivity of the circuit and the current area estimates of the primitives. Then we estimate congestion using a fast global router. They used MCTU_GR. What does that mean? I don't know, but it's a, I do kind of know this. This is basically just a Pathfinder router, I believe, which just runs the first iteration or two, which allows you to estimate where the congestion is. And then we update the area of each primitive based on the congestion and the local utilization of resources around that primitive. What that means is that if you are a LUT and you're in an area that is hyper congested, or you're in an area which has very high utilization, I'm going to increase your area. That way, other cells will be pushed away from you and you will be pushed away from other cells. That way I can legalize this better. And then we repeat, just over and over and over again. As you can see, this dynamic area adjustment is actually kind of important. If I didn't have this, I'd have an overlap-free solution, but there's a lot of legality constraints that I'm just kind of throwing away, that I'm ignoring. And although that's okay, you kind of are trusting the full legalizer to fix up all your problems, which will cause a lot of displacement, which is not great. Our goal here is to get as close to the true full legalized solution as possible. This makes sense so far? Awesome. So estimating the local resource utilization is the major focus of this paper. And yeah, I would say that's the major focus of this paper. They had a bunch of formulas. I didn't want to put them in the slides because I didn't want to explain them. So if you want to go into more detail on the exact formulation, I recommend you read the paper. But in this, I'm going to give an overview of what the formulas mean. So that's why whenever you see refer to the paper for details, that means I was too lazy to put them in the slides. In reality, it's more just like I didn't want to. I didn't want to bore you guys. So This is actually a key definition. Utilization in any context is the expected resource utilization of each primitive in a local area divided by the expected capacity in that area. In other words, the number of CLB slices. So I say, okay, I look at a little window and I say, the sum of all the area of all the LUTs is 20. And in this area, there are only 10 slices. Therefore, I am 2 times overutilized here, so I need to up the area of everyone inside by something around 2x. Now you look at the formulas, it's a little bit more complicated. They don't want to grow it by 2x immediately. They want to kind of grow it slowly. But you can look at the paper for details. So the expected resource utilization is computed in 2 ways. For LUTs, we estimate it based on the number of LUTs in the CLB. And then for flip-flops, it's estimated based on the control signal constraints on the flip-flops. This is how they get the complicated constraints of control signals. What does that mean? I'll show a figure in a moment, but within one CLB, what we would call tile, but what Xilinx called a slice, you're going to find 2 clocks that can actually go in there, I believe. I think you're only allowed to have 2 clock signals. You know what? Let's go ahead. So this is what the inside of a Xilinx UltraScale architecture CLB. I got this figure from their paper. It's a really good figure. And yes, I am correct. They only have 2 clock signals. And so therefore, if you have 3 LUTs in here, all using 3 completely different clocks, they just can't go in there. So you have to kind of keep track of that. And I said LUTs, I meant flip-flops, sorry. And then we also have our resets and we also have our clock enables. Now we have 4 clock enables and 2 resets, but we have to account for all of this. Doing this inside of an analytical formulation is actually really, really hard. So we usually just ignore it and let the full legalizer deal with the problems. But they say, no, 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 no. We're going to actually deal with this. And we do that through our area adjustment. We estimate based on all the control signals that you are using and all the neighbors around you, what is your area going to be approximately? And then they use that to update their areas. So as I said, this work focuses only on the Xilinx UltraScale architecture. Everyone from the ISPD competition did because ISPD was a competition made by Xilinx. They said, here's an architecture, here's a set of benchmarks, make it run fast. And that's what they did. So as such, they focus only on the CLB constraints of that architecture and nothing else. And if you look at the formulation, it's pretty hard-coded to that architecture. It's not quite architecture aware where you just give it any architecture and it'll work. But they do say that you can actually extend this to any other architecture as well. You just have to rewrite all those formulas and all those estimators to match your architecture, which is a kind of a laborious process and it's not something you can automate easily. It is, I don't even, yeah, I would go so far as claiming that it would be very, very hard to automate that process. So this isn't great for a general, any architectures, like all architectures will work with this, but this is a great algorithm if you have just a single architecture you're focusing on. So that's how we estimate the local routing utilization. And as I kind of hinted at before, this is what the Xilinx UltraScale architecture CLBs look like. Throughout this paper, they don't even talk about RAMs. They don't talk about DSPs, none of that. They just kind of say they get pre-packed and that's the end of it. And they just place them kind of wherever. They focus almost entirely in this paper on the CLB slices. Just kind of had to put that in there somewhere. And this is the effect. So on the top, we see this is what happens when we don't have dynamic area adjustments. And what you'll see here is that our utilization has these huge spikes in areas where there's lots of congestion. If you remember that graph that I showed you early on with those 2 dashed lines with the red bar that goes over the red dashed line, this is kind of what it's showing here. We have these flip-flops that are all in a region where maybe they all have different clocks, for example. Maybe they all have different clock enables or resets, and they're all fighting for the same resources. This is a huge problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and up their areas and kind of push them aside, force them away from each other. And what that does is it creates this kind of like bump effect where we have these valleys of nothing, but things kind of get spread into those valleys. But one thing that the authors note that's really interesting, and I just found it really cool, look at what happened to the LUTs. So up here, the LUT utilization was pretty flat, pretty even throughout the chip, but we had spikes in flip-flops. When I reduced the flip-flop utilization, the LUT utilization seemed to have gone negative. We have these like valleys that appeared. What's going on here is as I moved my flip-flops away, the LUTs they were connected to are following. This is kind of the fun part about analytical placement. You get to see things kind of move in a very organic way, which you can see with simulated annealing-based approaches, but they're kind of just kind of messy. This is kind of like a logical, oh, they're following the leader. They're going along with the flip-flops that move. Just kind of a cool thing. The idea is just that we're reducing this overutilization, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, at the expense of using a bit more resources than maybe we need at the time. But detailed placement will fix that, hopefully. Oh yeah, I just put little green boxes so I can say, look at that.
I don't think the utilization is actually clear.
No, no, sorry, you are absolutely correct. The utilization is defined as a number between 0 and 1. Actually, no, defined as a number greater than 0. It can be greater than 1, that's bad. But what I mean by it went negative is that let's call this the baseline. It went down from that. So it reduced. Thank you for that correction. Okay, study up. This is on the homework. So I don't want you guys to read this formula. Don't even look at the notation. This was from the paper, but the explanation in the text is better. So I'm going to walk through the explanation. Maximize the clustering score, think packing objective, without hurting the placement quality. That's what that first line says. That's our goal. That's our objective. We want to make our packing as great as possible, and maybe absorbing as many nets as we can, while without hurting the placement quality as much as we can. Such that each LUT and flip-flops are assigned to one and only one CLB slice. You can't duplicate LUTs, it's not allowed. All architecture rules are satisfied. Can't have more than 2 clocks, can't have more than 2 enables, and so on. And finally, the maximum displacement of any primitive is no larger than some set value. Notice that they put this directly in the problem statement. This is super important. I don't want to say most analytical placements, a lot of analytical placers just kind of ignore the maximum displacement. They just say, you know what, if I reduce the average displacement, that should bring down the max displacement. That's not always the case. Oftentimes, reducing the max displacement is just not it won't just come naturally. You have to kind of force it. This is something that Haidar has been learning about. It's something that we want to be careful for, and it actually is hard to fight for. Why do we care about this? Well, the key idea with trying to reduce the max displacement is that if the max displacement is too large, meaning that let's say just one LUT moved to another side of the chip, all the connections it was connected to are still back where they started. And that's a problem because that means is that you just made your placement horrible and you don't want to do that. So keeping the max displacement low is actually a really important thing, just as important, people would say, as average displacement. So that's the overall parallel direct legalization problem statement. The direct legalizer, their full legalizer, is just trying to do this. How do we do it? Well, like we're college admissions students, like we're doing college admissions. I stole all these pictures from Google, so don't judge me. Let's say we have 4 students. These 4 students are trying to apply to 3 amazing colleges: University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, and the University of Texas at Austin. I just picked random colleges. How does it work in the real world? Well, what will happen is all the students will apply to colleges, each one individually. I want to make this very, very clear. Each student, independent of each other, thinks, what are my top 3? I want U of T first, Waterloo second, Texas third. Second student, independently, says, I want to do Waterloo, Toronto, and then University of Texas and Austin. Each one is completely independent, and they send out their applications, first choice, second choice, third choice, and maybe student A up here just can't go to University of Texas and Austin. Maybe they're not a citizen of the United States, so they won't even apply. That's kind of a key thing. So the students send out their applications, the universities deliberate, they say, okay, who do I actually want? And the colleges send offers. Again, very important thing. Each college is completely independent. University of Toronto says, okay, I like Billy, he's okay. Amanda, she's good, and so on. And they send out their offers. And then the students accept whichever was their favorite. Again, completely independent. Notice all of the independence here. Step 1, you can do completely in parallel. Each student completely in parallel. Step 2, completely in parallel, and so on. This is why people try to look at this analogy as a way of doing full legalization. I'm going to jump the gun here. The students are our LUTs, our flip-flops, and our colleges are our slices, if that wasn't obvious. So now, of course, some students didn't get accepted to the college they wanted, and some colleges didn't fill all their slots. Some slices don't have enough, all their LUTs filled up yet. So we repeat until all the students are in college. Basically, every LUT and every flip-flop is in the right place. Let me see. Okay. So, bam. Look at that. That's our algorithm. Now, that was the theory. This is how colleges work in the real world. It's not going to work for this problem. We have to kind of invert the problem. Instead of the LUTs and flip-flops directly sending out their applications, we're going to do it backwards. The slices are going to send offers to cells. This is important. Each slice, one by one, is going to say, okay, if I could get LUT 1 and flip-flop 1, I'm going to be so happy. I don't want FF2 and I don't want FF3. I just want LUT 1 and flip-flop 1. So I'm going to send out offers to LUT 1 and flip-flop 1. This guy, on the other hand, says, oh man, if I can get flip-flop 1 and flip-flop 2, I'm going to be really happy. And so on. So they send out their offers. Then the cells will send out their acceptances. They say, oh, LUT 1, oh, I was accepted into slice number 1. Oh, it's my favorite slice. And it sends out, it goes, I'll go to slice 1. FF1 says, oh, you know what? Slice 2 is my favorite. I'm going to select that one, and so on. And now here's the final key step. The slices will admit the cells if all of the cells that they sent the offers to have accepted. That's key to this algorithm. Slice 1 sent offers to LUT 1 and FF1. LUT 1 accepted the offer, but FF1 didn't. That's important. It means that, okay, I thought that would be a good admission, but it didn't work out. So what's going to happen is Slice 1 is going to say, oh, okay, looks like FF1 is wanted somewhere else. If that's the case, let me update who I'm going to ask next. So we're going to repeat this process over and over again. Now, of course, if slice 2 said FF1 and FF2, and FF1 and FF2 both accepted it, done. It creates its cluster and it goes to sleep. It's done. But that's what we're going to do. So now a question you're going to have is, why did I invert this? Or why did they invert this in this paper? Why didn't they do the regular admissions process? Because it's not this simple. In using the student analogy, there are some students that have to go to college together or really want to go to college together. And there are some students that just absolutely despise each other and just do not want to go to college together. And actually, they can't be in the same building together. The same thing happens here. LUT1 and FF1 might share a net. They're friends. They want to go to college together. They want to go to the same slice. However, FF1, FF2, and FF3, they're all using different clocks. They hate each other. If they go to the same building, they're going to kill each other. So, or in reality, they're going to kill the slice. Not enough nets. So that's why we can't have them all send out applications. We kind of have to do this in a reverse order because only the slices know who can actually go in. And again, the reason why we're doing this whole hullabaloo of sending out applications and getting acceptances is because of all the parallelism we get. Each of these colleges are going to send out their offers in parallel. Each of the cells are going to accept the offers in parallel and over several iterations. And there's a little score function that these cells use to pick whatever slice they want, whichever one they think is the best. And how to quickly read this equation? How am I doing? Oh yeah, we're great. I love this. We have our packing objective, which is absorb as many nets as possible. This helps with routability. It's just a good thing to do. The Packer in VPR does this, and I tried not doing this, and it's just a terrible idea. So doing this is a good idea. Absorbing nets improves routability and improves wire length. Usually it's a good idea, but avoid increasing the HPWL, meaning our overall objective isn't going to be hurt by putting these things together. Finally, this little lambda thing over here is just an empirical weighting factor. I believe they use 0.02. Just set it to a number that you think works well for your architecture. Okay, so we have our score function, we have our algorithm. I just want to kind of summarize this because this is kind of the whole point of the paper. This is what they've been talking about. This is their new paradigm. What's going on here is that they formulate the problem similar to a college admission. The colleges, which are the slices, sends offers to their favorite students, cells first. If all of those cells they sent offers to of a given slice accept the offer, yep, then all cells are admitted to that slice. If not, the slice is going to have to rethink who is inviting. This process repeats until no more offers are made. Now, wait a minute, there might be someone left over. I said no more offers are made. A slice may not send an offer, but then there might be a flip-flop sitting over there that didn't get any offers. It had a GPA of 1.0. It couldn't get into any college. So what are we going to do? I'll explain that in a moment. This does happen. However, let's continue with this. The main benefit of this formulation is that slices can select which cells to offer to completely in parallel. Cells can select which slices to accept their offer to completely in parallel. And the fine-grained parallelism enables high scalability. Because I can attack this problem with a ton of threads, I'm able to get a ton of scalability. So if I had a GPU with like 1,000,000 threads and I have 1,000,000 cells, hopefully I can do this with, I can use all those threads to my advantage. This process is very similar to consensus-based clustering. But there's a key difference. The main key difference is LSC does clustering and just clustering. It's the same idea though. It's based on the college admission process. It's based on the idea that I'm going to try and create clusters and things are going to negotiate with each other's in the same way as if I was trying to send out offers to colleges. However, what makes this one different is it's not just doing clustering. This process does placement as well. That's the new paradigm. They're doing both clustering and placement together to try and find the best solution. There's also other differences in the details, like for example, how they formulate their costs and everything like that, and how things are sent and accepted, but the overall structure is extremely similar.
So, how does exactly this algorithm was placement? Because I don't see it.
That's a really good question. I didn't draw it. I probably should have. This slice right here is at tile location 0, 0. This slice right here is at tile location 0, 1.
So doesn't this, like this whole direct localization, it happens after the global placement has converged? Right?
Yes, definitely.
So they do have the placement.
They do have the place. They have a flat placement.
Right, but the same thing happens with like the legalizer and VPR.
No, it doesn't. The legalizer in VPR takes the flat placement to create clusters, and then the initial placement to place those clusters. Notice two independent steps. Now you might say, okay, isn't that kind of, it's the same thing? It's not. Because there are information you're going to learn during placement that, oh crap, I really shouldn't have clustered those two things together because now the placement's horrible. And the opposite's also true. So the idea is that if I do them together, I can kind of balance off these kind of decisions and I can make hopefully the best decision. That's kind of the key to the new paradigm they're trying to push for.
Honestly, I think the main difference here is that so in VPRB cluster things to a CLB.
Yep.
Here it clusters to
the CLB
at some place.
You're right. That's the biggest, and that's, I would claim, is actually a very, very important difference. Because now what Amir is pointing out here is, isn't the difference just we're creating a bunch of random, not random, but clusters that could be placed really anywhere in VPR and then placing them. And here we're already assigning them. What's really the difference? Why make this difference? The idea is that I'm not going to finish creating that cluster, the cluster, until I'm in full understanding that this was the right decision. And that's kind of where we're going with this. It's just that we don't want to kind of lock our clusters early. The earlier you cluster, the earlier you lock yourself into a clustering, the worse off you're going to be usually. If you delay as long as possible, you tend to get better quality, but at the expense of runtime usually, because it's a much more complex problem. It's a really great question. Okay. So I kind of hinted at before that some LUTs and flip-flops could get left behind. We kind of have to deal with that. So they call that exception handling. Again, look at the paper for details. I am not going into that algorithm. It's actually kind of gnarly, but it's actually due to the max displacement constraint. As I mentioned before, if the flat placement is far from legal, the prior algorithm may not find a full legal placement, and especially if it's really illegal, we really don't want the max displacement to be too large. So a natural idea to this problem is that what if I just upped the max displacement? Let's say I failed to do my packing algorithm, my full legalizer failed. Let's increase the max displacement. Well, we want to avoid that. This is not ideal since the max displacement can have bad effects on quality. So I kind of want to enforce this max displacement constraint. Instead, what they do is they attempt to rip up and re-legalize clusters to try and find a full legal placement. The max displacement threshold is only increased if even this fails. If even this fails, then fine. I'll increase the max displacement threshold. We have to do that. We want to get a solution. But the idea is that this shouldn't happen too often. The hope is that if your flat placement is really good, your global placement did its job, we shouldn't have to do this. See the paper for details? Again, you know what that means. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of formulas I'm kind of hiding in these slides, but that's the key idea here. We're going to do some rip-ups. We're going to do some last-minute fix-ups to try and fix any problems. So, results. Read them and weep. Big old table. So what they're doing here is they're comparing to UT place F, which is, how do I put this? This is kind of like they took their work and put it inside of UT place F. It's kind of like an extension of this. So this is UT place as it was presented in the paper. And they show about a 4.4% reduction in wire length and about a 24% reduction in runtime. Now they said, okay, but how much of that is the direct legalizer I just showed you, and how much of that is that area adjustment thing I showed you? Well, what they did was they said, okay, let's take UT place F and add the area adjustments. Just don't use the legalizer, and they'll use whatever UT place's legalizer is. In that case, they actually saved about 1.4% ish, and the runtime got a little worse because you have to update the areas, which makes the global placement a little harder. Finally, I said, okay, well, let's also use a greedy legalizer. In that way, it's very more similar to kind of how VTR does its packing. We greedily create our clusters. In that case, our quality actually gets worse, but our runtime improves. Using greedy algorithms are cheap. There's a reason why we use it in VTR. If we had to use a more expensive algorithm, it would take forever. We want to kind of make it fast. So this kind of shows the trade-off here between why we actually have to why using a greedy full legalizer can be worse for quality, but can be better for runtime. Cool. This was, I think, the most important results from this paper. The quality is great, but this is kind of showing how good their legalizer truly is, or in reality, how close the flat placement was to legal, and how good the full legalizer was at keeping things from moving. So this is a graph showing the displacement of cells. It's a histogram of all the displaced cells. And what we see here is that UT place F, the original work, the displacement is pretty flat. So that means most, like I don't even want to say most cells. Let's say 5 cells had a displacement of 2, 5 cells a displacement of 4, and so on. That led to an average displacement of 21.4, but a max displacement of 162.5. The units here are not really important. It's just a big number. UT place plus their improvements to the area adjustment. Hey, look at that. It actually helped the average displacement. That's a good thing. It means that just using this area adjustment has kept our displacement from getting worse. But the max displacement didn't change all that much. The average divided by 2, but the max did not reduce by 2. This is kind of a common theme here. Max displacement is harder to reduce. And then finally, when we use greedy, DAA plus a greedy, we do reduce the max displacement and the average quite a bit because it's getting close to their proposed solution. But finally, they showed their proposed solution, which did a really good job of tightening up the displacement, which is really important. Again, this is what this work has been pushing towards. The idea that I can use a flat placement, I can create a very good flat placement, and then I can fully legalize it without making the max displacement too large. This is kind of the results of that. Now, I want you to notice something here. This is actually kind of important. I don't have the chart here. That's a shame. It's hard to see here. Their work actually has worse wire length for the flat placement. It's actually a little bit worse. It's hard to see. It's about 4%, I think they said in the paper. But what they say in the paper, which is really important, is that although it got worse wire length, the solution they made was more legal. And so what ends up happening is when you do your full legalization, although we started from a worse wire length, after full legalization, my wire length actually does not get too much, doesn't get as worse as the other guys. And of course, detail placement just how it kind of gives you a little bit of a reduction. But overall, as you can see, it kind of keeps a lower wire length. Another very important result. Finally, you can't talk about a parallel algorithm without including a chart like this. This is their scalability. Now, I normally put threads as my x-axis, but this is okay. They're trying to show that their design, that their full legalizer is linear in runtime with the number of cells. So as you can see, as the number of cells increases, the runtime is about linear. And another thing they show is that as I go from 1 threads to 2 threads to 4 threads to 8 threads, the scalability is around the number of threads. Now, it's not exactly. I believe when they get to 8 threads, they're at about 6x runtime improvement, which is actually very good for a full legalizer. Trying to parallelize a packer is actually a hard problem, so it's actually not that bad. But again, yeah, I know. They put the numbers in the paper. I should have put them in the slide. Sorry about that.
And you take like the slope, yes.
Yep.
One thread hits the 0.2 and 200 line, and four should be at the 0.1, 0.8, and 200.
Yep, exactly. So it's not exactly 1-to-1, but it's close. At 8 threads, I believe it was 6 point something X runtime improvement. So again, it's not 8x improvement, but it's still pretty good. So that's important. Okay, and finally the runtime breakdown. This is kind of my last so what for this work, I think. There's other things. Notice how much time they're spending in the quadratic placer, how much time they're spending in analytical placement, and how little they're spending in the legalizer. Now, this isn't just because the legalizer is parallel. Yeah, the parallel legalizer helps this a ton. But this is pointing out a key fact that they talk about in their work. They're trying to spend as much time as they can to create the most legal flat placement they can. That way, the direct legalizer doesn't do as much work. And that's kind of the whole so what of this work. We could have reduced this. We could have made the quadratic placer take less time and made a less legal solution. We could have. But then the direct legalizer would have exploded in runtime. And we want to prevent that.
Because you need to do the legality checks anyway.
You usually do the legality checks anyways, but our architecture is a little simpler than VTR, so the legality checks are cheaper. So I wouldn't have the VPR mindset for this particular problem. But also, if you are a very illegal flat placement, I'll have a lot of, well, remember, we're doing this like candidate thing where we have these students and we have these admissions. It will have a ton of iterations. Gonna have to keep like negotiating with each other. It's not great. And also that cleanup pass is not very fast. So we want to prevent that as well. It's a good question. Finally, they also compared their work to some other state-of-the-art. So this is from the ISPD competitions. This is the 2016 competition. This is the 2017 competition. I didn't put it in the slides. The 2017 competition had some extra clock region constraints, and they said in their paper that it's really easy to add to their formulation. So you can read the paper if you want details on that. But the idea is still that they are very good. Although their runtime isn't as good as something like Ripple FPGA or Gplace, their quality and wire length is better than all the competitors for 2016. And for 2017, their wire length is usually better, but again, their runtime is worse than, let's say, Ripple FPGA. However, there's this one guy that was a little bit better. I don't remember the story on this, and I apologize for that. All right, how we on? All right, really great time. Are there any questions before we conclude? Because I think that's my last slide.
Are there runtime results like done in parallel with multiple cores or?
That's a really great question, actually. I should have mentioned that. They explain this in the paper. They try to argue for this. Their work, their detail placer is parallel. All other works are serial. Yeah. So they do claim in the paper, they make a really strong argument as to why they did that.
I guess the others cannot be parallel.
That was one of the arguments. They said that, these guys don't get as much parallelism. It doesn't really make sense. They also claim that detailed placement or the full legalizer is a really small component of the runtime anyways. So they said it doesn't skew the results all that much. And these are not really pushing too hard for like the runtime. They're really these results are really pushing that the wire length is better. So I think it's fair. It is just kind of like it's kind of like a little asterisk you got to think about.
Also, do they have any CPU results?
No, because I don't believe the ISPD results generally had that kind of stuff. I don't recall though. It's something that I don't they didn't mention at all in the paper, and it wasn't in their formulations on how to handle timing. They do mention timing though throughout the paper, especially in the background section, but yeah, not sure about timing. All right, well, thank you guys all so much for listening. I'm gonna kill the recording.